It's Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, joined today by Luis Hoyos. He is a professor at Cal State Pomona, Cal Poly Pomona, I should say. And I can't wait for this interview. I've been looking forward to it for weeks. And
you and me.
I know. And you are a professor of architecture, of history, kind of, sort of?
A professor of architecture with specialties in urban design and preservation.
So let's talk about preservation. Yeah. We'll start with, what is the National Preservation Act?
Well, the NHPA we owe that to enterprising congressmen and then to the wisdom and cooperation of Lyndon Johnson, who gave us the act in 1966. Before that, preservation was kind of a hit or miss thing. And it started, of course, with old ladies getting together in Washington trying to preserve Mount Vernon and Monticello.
I understand.
It evolved to people, let's say, first out west, where there were groups of people trying to preserve forts and battlefields and things like that. But now the Act gives us 50 preservation offices all over the country.
And speaking of 50, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the National Historic Preservation Act.
Yes.
And I want to get a sense from you. I mean, you're a partisan on this, but that's good. Why is preservation important? Why is historic preservation critical?
It's vitally critical to the country because it gives us context. It tells us how the country developed, and it gives us perspective. Right. So those two things are really, really important. Ours is a very messy and long and wonderful history. We've had lovely events of bravery and creativity, but we've also had a less pleasant history involving wars of expansion, our own Civil War, difficulties with people's inclusion, and that's where, if I can pivot,
please.
The main big message nationally is the recognition that we are the United States. We were a diverse country from the beginning. We are a diverse country, and that the preservation movement, as a little constellation of people and agencies and consultants and experts and historians and archaeologists, let's not forget the archaeologists, we all serve to organize the movement and to recognize things that are important. These are places, but I'll bet you most people don't think that the places include cemeteries, launch sites, military reservations.
But I want to dig deep into this because we are seeing a sea change in how we perceive historically relevant sites. And you said it, we are now looking at history in a more diverse manner with a different lens.
Right. We owe that to Secretary Ken Salazar, the preceding Secretary of the Interior.
First term of the Obama administration.
Right, who directed his staff, basically, he noticed an imbalance in the registers, the National Register and the National Historic Landmarks. Those are the lists of the important things in this country. He noticed that the registers were lopsided and were not representative of other people's stories.
And when you say other people's, meaning other than white Anglo-Saxon,
right? I mean, the old saw
the Anglo story.
The old saw, which I find irritating, but history belongs to the victors and all that.
Right.
I think it's not an adversarial thing.
Of course,
it's a matter of correcting the record
and supplementing. I mean, there's enough history to go around.
Exactly.
And let's talk about some of the sites because this is exciting. So here in California, we may have forgotten that actually around the time of Lyndon Johnson in that era, the farm workers movement really grew up.
Right.
And there are a couple of sites that are now designated as historic sites.
Yes, which I wish the public would take note of this and visit. One is, of course, the first compound associated with the United Farm Workers and Cesar Chavez, which is called the 40 Acres. Very important place in Delano, California. This is where Chavez built buildings, and he organized his movement, and he stayed there until he was told, "You're really too exposed here," following attempts on his life.
Wow.
So so they moved him to a recently acquired parcel up in the hills above Keene, California, which is called La Paz, where he is buried. So both hold incredible objects and buildings and landscapes associated with the movement, and importantly, to our business in preservation, they are not classic buildings
They're
with
not
fantastic
museums.
architecture.
Right.
No,
Right.
no, it's not the Capitol,
Right.
Capitol building or a fancy airport or high-rise. These are utilitarian buildings, and we're now starting to understand how to preserve them.
And how do we make places like these accessible to the public, both literally and metaphorically?
Well, a lot of them, if they're lucky enough to be embedded in a National Historic Park or a state park, you just go to the
Got
website and you're there. They say pick a park, right? Which is
Right.
great. I say understand your history and find where their history is expressed and go visit. So going on to NPS, which runs parks, which runs preservation,
Right.
The public can find all these resources. You can also just Library of Congress or the NPS site, you can understand the 95,000 listings under the National Register. It covers everything.
I want to talk about the LGBT movement. For those of us that may be, I guess, not baby boomers, younger than baby boomers,
Yes.
we may not be familiar with the Stonewall event.
Right.
Riots.
And
Tell us about this. Also around the Lyndon Johnson era, maybe a little after that. I think Nixon was president
right,
by
this
then.
would have been 1968,
Right,
I believe.
okay,
So
yeah.
famously, it's a
Yeah.
story about the local police harassing gay people, and in this case, there were a lot of
It was men. It was exclusively men. I'm not sure.
Men being men
yeah.
and also being drag queens. A
I
very
see.
interesting side story
Got it.
there. So gender identity plays into this. So at some point, and I think it was a New Year's Eve party, they said enough is enough, and they went out and actually joined the police in battle.
Right.
So that was designated a national monument.
And so this, by the way, occurred in New York.
So this occurred in New York.
Yeah, and so tell us about the Stonewall Inn and what that signifies.
Well, every people has its significant places.
Right.
Like we're seeing in the news, and I don't mean to get political.
No, please.
Reservations.
Right.
We may drive through the freeways and see a mountain. They see a sacred place. In the case of Stonewall, it was a pivotal event in the LGBTQ movement, so it merits preservation, even though it is a perfectly common building with no architectural features to celebrate.
I want to talk about the Vietnam era.
Right.
I remember, God, this is crazy. You never know why something sticks with you. I was just listening to the radio, and it was the 25th anniversary of Kent State, and I couldn't get out of the car. It's now many years beyond that. And Kent State, again, I'm a little young, I'm post-baby boomer, just barely. And so tell us about the Kent State University event.
Kent State was a very, again, another pivotal event. This was Kent State University. There were already student protests, as there were all over the country. This is 1970, yes.
Right.
And they were protesting the Vietnam War.
Right.
And the conduct of the war, and the fact that young people were being sent to fight the war.
But what happened?
So what happened was it's very, very muddy. But in the nomination that we just heard 2 weeks ago in Washington, the record of the events of people and the National Guard on one side and students on the other is explained through geographic space in the campus.
Right, and just to remind, in our final moments, people died. The
yeah,
National Guard.
9 people were injured, 4 of them died. So now we felt that this was an important moment in our history, albeit very unpleasant, and it needed to be documented and memorialized.
We appreciate you having... let me just do that outro again. Sorry. We appreciate you joining us. His name is Luis Hoyos. No, what's the last name?
Hoyos.
Hoyos. One more time. We appreciate you joining us. His name is Luis Hoyos. I'm Brad Pomerance. Turn on local nation.